Welcome to the very first episode of the Trauma in the Brain podcast. I'm your host, Chantell Tilly Anderson, and I'm so grateful you're here. This podcast was born out of a simple but important question. What does it really mean to live and lead from a trauma-informed perspective? Today, I'm joined by licensed professional counselor Matt Laszlo as we begin our journey by exploring the word itself, trauma. What does it mean, and how does it shape the brain, the body, and our daily lives? This is where our conversation starts. Matt, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I am Matt Laszlo. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Arizona. About me, I started out in crisis counseling, which is suicide risk assessment stabilization. I did that for over 4 years while I worked on my degree. I then moved into counseling and have been in mental health for over 12 years. Trauma therapy is what's always interested me, what's always been my passion. Started out because I'm a veteran, had planned to work with veterans on PTSD, but then realized PTSD goes so much further than that. The impact of trauma is unfortunately everywhere. And so I got into outpatient behavioral health, mental health, and have been doing that for over 12 years.
Awesome. So working with you was really awesome. We worked together for about 2 years, and then we kind of didn't talk for a while, and I found you on LinkedIn, and I was like, hey, I have this thing. I need help with it. I don't know what to do with it. I just have all these followers, and I'm like, how do we get the word out? How do we talk about this? So thank you for being here. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited. So I'm going to jump right in. Let's define trauma. So when people hear the word trauma, it often means different things to different people. How do you define trauma in your practice?
Yeah. And I like simple, easy to remember things. It's kind of become such a controversial point and topic and a point of debate. But in one of my counseling classes, there was a very simple, straightforward thing. Trauma negatively affects our view of ourselves, our view of the world, or both. That to me very well defines the mental perspectives, the changes that happen that makes something traumatic. Something scary, something bad happens. If it doesn't affect your overall view of the world or yourself, it tends to just be integrated into long-term memory. It's here and it's gone. Car accident where things go well, nobody gets hurt, you don't expect anything, you're scared, but it doesn't change the way you view the world. It doesn't change the way you view yourself. The physiological, what makes something traumatic is the fight or flight system is essentially overwhelmed. One system, fight, if that activates and resolves the problem, then it again integrates into long-term memory. The system plays out the way it's expected to. Same with flight. Something scary happens, a dog gets out from behind a fence, chases you down the street, you're able to outrun it. Typically that integrates into long-term memory. No significant changes because the fight or flight system activates, does what it's supposed to do, and your brain goes, everything worked out the way it's supposed to. The fight, flight, or freeze system, oftentimes the freeze, this is my opinion, my observation from working with people, is where things become traumatic because the brain can't process. There's very often the perception of no hope. The situation is not going to work out. Pain, maybe even death is inevitable. The system floods with cortisol, adrenaline, and you often get partial dissociation or full dissociation, which further prevents integration into long-term memory. So that's what's happening. That I define trauma as anything that overwhelms your fight or flight system and negatively affects your view of yourself, your view of the world, or both.
That answered my question perfectly. So As you explained, fight, flight, or freeze, does everybody have all of those responses, or are those just a category of like how to define a person's? Obviously, it's a category of how to define a person's reaction. But what I'm asking is, are there different chemicals released, or why do some people have fight and why do some people have flight and freeze? What determines how I respond to something that might be traumatic?
Sure. Well, in terms of keeping it simple, I like easy to remember things. The short answer is yes. Everybody has the capacity for fight, flight, or freeze. Now, I think you talked about fawn later, and so maybe I can save this, but there's also, they've added the fourth F, fawn. That one in my mind is problematic. I don't see that as an automatic nervous system function. That's more of a learned thing, although it can happen at a partially dissociated state when the fight or flight system is activated. But for simple, easy to process situations, fight, flight, or freeze, everybody has the capacity for those, albeit on a very small level. What I mean by that is, well, if you jump out of the shadows and scare an MMA fighter, very good chance you're going to get punched in the face. Their fight system is highly activated over their flight system, but that's a learned behavior. They've obviously trained for that. That's what's going to happen. But even a small child, you jump out and scare them, they might throw something at you that they have in their hands. That's their fight system. It's an almost completely unconscious automatic response that just happens. You see animals in the animal kingdom, even a big giant lion, something comes out of the bushes, its initial response is to run. So I've heard a lot of conversations that your flight system might be the faster, more natural, even for a big scary lion, because there's always the risk of harm. And then fight is your backup, and then freeze is your last line of defense. Now, I don't think that most scientists, professionals would say that they're linear. I've not read any of that, though they might be. But some of it, so all that to say, some of it is learned, some of it is automatic. But we all have the capacity for all three of those.
Can trauma be small or big, or is that the wrong way to think about it?
I think that's a great way to think about it. I was trained in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and retraining, and they literally use big T and small t trauma as definitions. And what I love about that, now anything can sort of be attacked, I think, and used right or wrong. It's not to say that one person's trauma is not as significant as anybody else's. That is not what small t trauma is designed to say. The reason they implemented that modality is we just, as a profession, clinicians, psychotherapy, saw far too many people saying they don't have trauma when they have significant amounts of trauma. So small t trauma is often used as anything that overwhelms your fight or flight system, um, changes your perception of yourself, the world, or both, like we talked about earlier, but may not have had the threat, the perception of death. Big trauma is anything where life-threatening type situations, or even the perception of it. So maybe you slide off the road in your car going 25 miles an hour. It's a super safe car with airbags. You got your airbag on or your seatbelt. It's not like you're necessarily going to die, but if your fight flight system says this is it, then it's obviously going to be stored differently, and that can be a traumatic event. So yeah, big and small trauma is a good way to think of it, so that we can be more inclusive of people's experiences.
I'd like to add and mention I personally did EMDR
Mm-hmm.
for some of my own issues, and it completely changed my life. I can't rave enough about how impactful and just different I think about the things that used to hurt me or make me, when I thought about them, I would get feelings of despair or sadness and it would just be overwhelming. Now I
Mm-hmm.
can think about the events and it's not it's not something that triggers me or
Mhm.
sends me into a mood. I don't ruminate over things anymore. And
Mhm.
that's so refreshing. So, yeah, EMDR. Holy cow.
Yeah. Do you want to stay with this, or because I can speak to that?
Yeah, let's take a couple seconds with it. Is that okay? Maybe like a
Yeah,
minute?
as long as you're good with it. EMDR is a newer modality for those that don't know. And it is still considered a form of talk therapy, but it does what many, many talk therapies do not do, which is actively activates and calms the fight or flight system. So it's hugely impactful for anybody suffering from trauma. If you can find a good EMDR clinician, it's a very fast, efficient, effective way. It specifically addresses those fight or flight systems, calms them, and you can have some pretty significant improvement pretty quickly. So I love EMDR. I kind of push that in any chance I get. It's very much a cool modality.
It is. I think the worst part or the only bad thing is that you kind of need to be there in person.
Hmm.
I wish there was, I mean, I guess there could be a way developed to somehow do like the bilateral stimulation while a person sits at home, but
Well, depends
intensive
on the
stuff.
clinician. Some will. The people that I trained under said that there is research that shows even over telehealth, it is still effective. I think what you may have run into is it's very much clinician. Essentially, it's clinician specific if the clinician is comfortable with it. But there's always a risk of losing service. It literally happened while we were talking about it. Internet goes down, video goes down, clinicians, you obviously have to stop the process. So that's an inherent risk of EMDR or telehealth. But there are some clinicians that are willing to do it. Just have to go slower, do some extra check-ins and things like
Yeah.
that. Safety
I think I'd
protocols.
be concerned about how maybe overwhelming the emotion can be at the beginning of processing an event
Yeah.
and being by yourself. That's some people I'm sure can handle it, but I remember being in those moments. It was like profusely crying and just unable, I had to have somebody there to help me remember how to breathe and
Hmm.
function and keep myself grounded and not completely dissociated the entire time.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, EMDR.
Hmm.
I like that.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next section. It's myths and misconceptions. So, for myths and misconceptions, I don't know which notes you have, but mine shows it as section 2.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, okay. A lot of people think trauma only means combat veterans or extreme abuse. Large T.
Hmm.
Can you speak to some of the misconceptions?
Yeah. Well, yes, and that is one of the biggest hindrances to treatment is that it's only combat veterans, it's only life or death situations or extreme abuses. Did an incredible job of accounting for additional things that are fake. And on there they have the 10 questions, which is includes abuse, neglect, um, verbal, emotional abuse, oftentimes parents with substance abuse, and things like that. So, yeah, the misconception that it's only veterans or that it's only extreme physical abuse is wrong and very dismissive of people's experiences and somewhat dangerous. I will say something that has interestingly come up in presentations that I've given when speaking about what can be traumatic. I've gotten the answer a couple of times. Well, anything can be traumatic, and I always cringe a little bit with that, um, because that we need a standard definition of what is trauma, like you mentioned earlier. Otherwise, it sort of runs the risk of everybody kind of pondering, am I traumatized when I'm not? And giving it too much power. Not everything is traumatic. There are still positive experiences. And to the capacity as possible, we want to build our defenses around things to prevent them from becoming traumatic. Um, Obviously, that is not always the case, and there has to be consistency in looking at what causes trauma and things that don't overwhelm the fight or flight system, things that are not significantly impactful of perceptions of situations, are not inherently traumatic.
Yeah, I think even I catch myself just in social situations, like with little, let's say I'm hanging out with a family that has little kids and one of the little kids just eats it on the ground. And I'm like, well, that looks traumatic. Like,
Mm-hmm. Right.
obviously, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So is that
Well,
is that insensitive to say something like that or like have thoughts like that?
that something looks traumatic.
Yeah, in a kind of joking way, like, oh, that baby might have PTSD, or you know what I'm saying? I've heard
Sure.
people like talk like that, and I wonder, I've just been presented with so many situations where it's ended up being somebody's made a comment about the cat got traumatized by the music, and then it turns around and they're like, PTSD isn't real. And then I find myself in a situation where I'm like, oh my goodness, like he's being serious.
Right. And
What do
I,
you do in that situation?
well, and
All of
I,
that. I know that was a big question.
oh, that's okay. I'll address as many of the points as I can. That's inherently one of the risks of saying that anything can be traumatic is it causes us to either overly aggressively start looking at, oh, you must be traumatized, or the pendulum swings the other ways and we get dismissive because it's like everything cannot be traumatic. We can't do this. And so then we tend to go too far and we start dismissing things that very much are traumatic. So to question it is never wrong. If I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if that's traumatic. But one of the things that I've encouraged parents in, because oftentimes parents are because of how much we're pushing trauma informed stuff. I've seen a lot of parents in different practices, different situations. I think I traumatized my kid. I think I traumatized my kid. I think if I did this, if this happened, is my kid traumatized? Tell them if they were not, if their fight or flight system was not completely overwhelmed, they didn't dissociate. If they cried, you were able to help them calm down, self-soothe, and talk to them, and then they went back to playing. They're not traumatized. They're okay. There's typically fairly significant signs and symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Um, After an event, if those symptoms are not there, trauma is not something that randomly activates far down the road. Certainly, it can become exacerbated, worsened. We may not notice it early on, but there's signs and symptoms. So, absent those things, not everything is traumatic.
And does it present differently in children than it does in adults? Or is there no set roadmap to how it affects people?
No, the roadmap may be there. I love a quote: "The laws of physics are forever complete, even if our understanding of them is forever incomplete." The roadmap, I believe, exists, and researchers far more into it than myself. Babette Rothschild is an author I love. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, of course, are starting to look at some of those things and understand them better for practical purposes. My passion, sort of, with regard to trauma is connecting some of the sciencey stuff, the research, to practical everyday life. So, what is the roadmap for recognizing trauma and addressing it in real life, in real time, even without a therapist? What we anecdotally often call the 1,000-yard stare. They're just looking down the road, contemplating it, and they're not there. They're not processing important positive information like Sir, ma'am, you're okay. Yeah, I'm okay. Wow, that was kind of scary, but you made it. Good job avoiding that accident. Um, so that partial dissociation, the fight, flight, freeze system, yeah, there's a very good chance that that's going to become a traumatic event in their mind without processing, without some grounding. Um, the other thing for me is trauma negatively affects our view of ourself. Shame statements. I'm so stupid. I'm so worthless. Why can't I do anything right? It's all my fault. Those kinds of statements are planting seeds in that traumatic moment when the fight or flight system is activated that is very, very likely going to become a traumatic memory because it's overwhelming fear coupled with overwhelming shame. That's a concoction for death. It's
Mhm.
absolutely leads to almost all of the symptoms of PTSD.
So, can two people experience the same event, but only one be traumatized?
Absolutely. I love sort of the foundation of cognitive therapy is the Greek philosopher Epictetus. Men are disturbed not by events, but by their perception of them. So at a very practical level, two people observing something, maybe not directly involved in it, observing an accident, one of them thinking, oh, those cars are not definitely not going to hit. They're not going to collide. It's going to be okay. The other one thinking they definitely are. Then the cars hit. The person thinks everything's going to be okay, feels empowered. Maybe one of them's a paramedic, a firefighter, immediately goes into what they need to do, helps people, just another day at the office. The other person thinks this is out of control, nothing good is going to happen, fight, flight, or freeze. They stand there and watch while the other person runs up and does something. And so that sticks with them significantly more. You have all the negative elements that we talked about, the freeze response, partial dissociation, shame, I should have done more, what's wrong with me? That person leaves traumatized by the same car accident that the other person observed and maybe even participated in without any problems.
I feel like that was a good overview of the impact of trauma. So, I want to move into trauma informed lens, section 4. The term trauma informed gets used a lot. From your perspective, what does it mean?
So I had somebody say one time, my niece was in a college class and she asked about trauma therapy and the therapist said to her, well, all therapy is trauma therapy. And I said, spoken like a true non-trauma therapist. Though I think I know what she meant by that, and there's a lot of validity to it. I think trauma informed, first and foremost for me at a very practical human level, is the capacity and the willingness to say, what happened to you? It's too problematic in managed healthcare that we address symptoms. Somebody is dissociative, somebody is angry, somebody is explosive, somebody is abusing substances. Here's something for the symptom. Here's a quick fix, coping skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's wait a second, what happened to you? Asking that question with the understanding that some form of trauma is behind these negative emotional behavioral problems in the present. I love dialectical behavioral therapy. It sort of has I don't know, one of their foundational principles. There are no bad people. There's only people with a lack of coping skills. Now their system is very coping skill heavy.
You froze up.
Where'd you lose me?
Oh my gosh. Okay. We were talking about being trauma informed and what that really means to you. And I honestly, beyond that, it started breaking up.
Did it? Well, then I'll
Yeah.
start over. Um, Trauma informed is first and foremost, in my mind, a willingness and a capacity when you see negative emotions or behaviors, problems, right? To say, what happened to you that started this? When did this start? Trauma can affect a person for an entire lifetime. Unresolved trauma continues to affect us until it's resolved. And so it's first and foremost questioning, is the past affecting the present? Some form of trauma. I tell people, Sigmund Freud over 100 years ago started talking about people's childhoods and how that might be affecting the present. I don't know how much he accounted for trauma per se, but he was on the right track. Childhood trauma is very, very often the problem for my emotional behavioral problems in the present. The second thing to truly be trauma informed is a capacity to help. It's not just pointing out that I think your trauma is negatively affecting you. It's saying, here's some modalities that can help improve that. Here's how we can help calm the fight or flight system. Here's how we can change those negative perceptions about yourself, the world, or both back to something more adaptive, functional, and healing. So,
Is there a way I can do that just as a friend to somebody in subtle, small ways?
yes,
I kind of jumped.
that's okay. I can track it if you're okay
Okay.
with it. The way to support a friend, right? You're not their therapist, you're their friend, is to be compassionate and understanding. When somebody seems overwhelmed, when somebody gets what we in our mind immediately goes, this is too much emotion. You shouldn't be responding this way. You shouldn't be acting this way. Ask yourself, why is this happening? And you can ask them the same thing. What's really going on here? Is there more? Is something else going on? Because trauma and the way it affects our perceptions of ourselves and the world, humongous impact on our functioning. But it's at such an unconscious level at some point that nobody is actively saying, hey, I think it's my trauma, which is why I'm treating you like crap right now. It just happens. And so with them not being consciously aware of course, if they're being mean to us, we're not consciously aware of it. All we see is the behavior. We think it's ridiculous. And then it becomes a fight. If any person in the situation, whether it's the person reacting or the person trying to support, can stop and go, what else is going on here? What do you really need? Model those relaxed breaths. Let's get that fight or flight system turned off and then try again. Acknowledging that this trauma is affecting you still, and it's affecting you in this moment, and I'm willing to help you address that. It's not an excuse. I know the thing that always comes up when I talk about this is we're just excusing bad behavior. No, we're not, because we're supporting them turning off the fight or flight system, and then we can redirect if need be. And oftentimes we don't even need to, because if the theoretical problem that's happening is somebody's being mean to you, you acknowledge they're clearly upset and maybe there's something else going on. You help them regulate their breaths. They're very likely in their conscious mind to go, hey, I'm really sorry. It's not you.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not excusing the bad behavior or continuing it.
How much more time do we have? How are you doing on time?
About 30 minutes.
Okay. Um, During our time working together, there was a situation that happened that I think really applies to what we're talking about. Am I allowed to vaguely talk about that?
You are.
So I was able to, do you know which one I'm talking about?
Mm-mm.
There was a newer client that came in to work with me. I was a youth case manager,
Mm-hmm.
and she suffered from, a few ailments and things that were. She had a lot of problematic behavior because she didn't necessarily understand what was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had created a new space at our office for children to just play and process and be.
Hmm.
And so one day we had an appointment, me and this child, and I brought her in and she loved it so much. It was such a great experience. It was such a great experience that when she had to leave, she got upset.
Hmm.
And then, foster mom had a reaction. And then from there, it just escalated and escalated and escalated. And by the end of it, I was holding this child, and it was so impactful to be able to I didn't know what to do. You approached the situation very like calm and professional, and you did exactly what you said. You decompressed it.
Hmm.
You helped me to be able I could look to you to know what to do. And
Hmm.
that was deep breathing. You were instructing me to breathe deep while I was holding the child to
Hmm.
help to calm her and just sit there and not move and just wait for her to calm herself.
Hmm.
And it was just it was such an impactful situation. It was so different. I had never seen something where it was the opposite of what I'd always seen growing up.
Hmm.
It was different than anything I'd ever experienced. So, um I hope I talked about that in context that sheds light on how to actually decompress that. I don't know if you remember it, but
I
and I know
do
you
now that
can't.
you, yeah, yeah, with some of that context.
I don't know if that's too personal and I can cut it out, but
No, and I think no qualifying information that's problematic. Um, and what I love about that, and I've recently read the book, the Whole Brain Child, and I think there's so much trauma implications in that one, which the authors of that are both very much trauma informed. It speaks to sometimes we try too often to rationalize with people that are having a trauma reaction. Once a person is triggered, um, saying to the person that just experienced a car accident and is overwhelmed and things like that, well, you have insurance, it's all going to be okay. It offers little to no reprieve, right? That's not calming me down. That's not helping the situation. And so anytime the fight or flight system is activated, that's where we have to start.
I feel more calm just watching you do that.
Right. And I tell people, now I love to tell people as a clinician, I stopped 10 years ago telling people take deep breaths because too many people are,
Yeah.
and then you tell them to take a deep breath and they can't. I've started just telling people exhale, exhale, exhale. Because when you exhale, the inhale obviously comes naturally. Nobody exhales and holds their breath. Everybody inhales and holds their breath. That's problematic. But monitoring or managing your breath system really sets everything in a positive motion, gets the fight or flight system to calm back down. You may have to do, some relaxation, undo the body's reaction to it, and then the rational mind can come around. Hey, great job not hitting that. You did a great job, and you have insurance. This car is going to be replaced. It's not a big deal. That helps once the fight or flight system is calmed down.
How do you feel? Do you have anything else you want to cover for the first episode?
No, it's your episode.
Okay. I have a couple more things to ask you, just
Mm-hmm.
some simple questions. And I think this one's probably the most important because of your reply, of
Mm-hmm.
what you might say. If someone listening is wondering, have I experienced trauma? What's a healthy way to start exploring that?
Yeah, and I love that question because it always comes up that after something like this, a presentation like this, people start wondering, have I been traumatized? And going looking for it. Typically, I tell people if you don't have problematic symptoms in the present, don't go looking for it. If you don't have substance use, if you don't have anxiety, depression, nightmares, flashbacks, the list goes on and on. If you don't have those things, well, it's likely that you don't have trauma or it's resolved trauma, because resolved trauma is very much a thing. I met with a patient recently that said, yeah, I have some pretty significant trauma, but I don't feel like that's affecting me. I feel like it's resolved. We kind of talked about, okay, let's poke around at it and see. I mean, we talked about some things. We kind of made some comparisons in the present. No, it's not a thing. Don't go looking for it. You're not traumatized, although you did experience trauma. If you have symptoms where the question, have I been traumatized, becomes useful is if you have problem emotions or behaviors that you have been trying to get a hold of and have not succeeded, then there's likely traumatic justification for the negative emotions and behaviors. When I say traumatic justification, that terminology for me comes from memory reconsolidation. Something happened in the past that made me feel unsafe, and I learned how to function in that situation, and I'm still applying it in the present. The example I use very, very often is a core belief like I am unlovable is going to have all kinds of emotional, behavioral symptoms in the present. I'm not going to let friends get very close. I'm going to push them away. I'm going to be extremely reactionary. Cycles of anxiety and depression, because anxiety, if I'm unlovable, I have to constantly hide it. I have to constantly do amazing things so that nobody can ever think that. And then ultimately I make one mistake and I crash because it proves that I am unlovable. And I might try really, really hard to be more committed to my partner and be more open and honest and try to let them in, and it doesn't work. And instead of beating myself up in the present, I should ask myself, what happened that I can't do this? Why am I not succeeding at this? And it's often very quickly comes up, well, it doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel right because ... And that ... is your trauma. It's like, well, that's not what I was taught. That's not what I experienced through pain and suffering and misery, whether it was chronic or acute. It changed my perception of myself, the world, or both, and it's still affecting me. So anytime listeners are experiencing things that they want to change, they know they need to change for the positive in their life, but they have not had success with it, look for the traumatic justification that keeps you stuck. Stop shaming yourself. Stop beating yourself up, saying, I should change this. I should be able to. I could. Start looking into why I can't. And the answer is often trauma is still affecting me.
Should and would and maybe if. What do you have to say for someone with a head full of shoulds and woulds?
I love good old cognitive therapy. Shoulda, woulda, coulda is always irrational. Now, irrational, not utilized in the way that oftentimes abusers use it, meaning when I'm experiencing normal, healthy emotions, they say, oh, you're just being irrational. That's not what it means. In cognitive therapy, irrational thoughts are any thoughts that are unverifiable, I can't prove it, and or they only serve to create misery. For me, the second one is what I often look at with patients, because a lot of times we tell ourselves it's verifiable. Well, I should have. I mean, I should have left. Yes, that's verifiable in the present, although the hindsight bias complicates the situation. But even if it is verifiable, is it doing anything other than serving to create misery in the present? Oftentimes the answer is no. Shoulda, woulda, couldas. I should do better. Yeah, but it kind of sounds like you're not going to, and that's not helpful. What you're going to do is tell yourself that and then beat yourself up in an hour when you didn't. Start looking at why am I not doing that? The one of the big things that I reference working in integrated care now is around food. Lots of people have unhealthy relationships with food. And how many people go looking for, is this a trauma response? Doesn't come up very often. But I watched a continuing education video by Dr. Felitti, who led the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And I think far too few people know that study came into existence because of a failed weight loss program. They created this amazing weight loss program, thought they were going to save the world. Everybody succeeded in losing all of the weight they needed to lose, and then almost catastrophically put it back on and more. Habits around eating, exercise, engagement in meaningful activities. When those positive changes aren't there, look to trauma as the thing that's continuing to hold me back. With the hope and understanding that by finding that, you can fix it. It's not a hopeless, helpless situation. Trauma informed doesn't mean, oh, Tilly, you have trauma. This is never going to get better. It's let's find out the trauma that's still affecting you so we can resolve it. We've got to start seeing trauma as resolved or unresolved.
That's a good way of looking at it, I think. For friends or family, how can they support someone living with trauma without overstepping?
It's a good question, and I know it's something that people worry about overstepping. Dr. Felitti, in his study, they basically told him asking these questions is overstepping. Him and his team didn't agree, and thankfully they didn't, because now we use the ACEs questionnaire in almost primary care settings, mental health settings, and everything in between. Overstepping, asking the question is not overstepping. And what I mean by that is you don't make assumptions about the trauma. If somebody's reacting very emotionally in a grocery store, I don't walk up to them and say, have you been sexually abused? That's overstepping. But I might ask, are you triggered? Are you feeling unsafe? Are you feeling overwhelmed? If their answer is yes, they're very likely to be open and receptive to support and help. I tell people all the time, genuine curiosity and empathy, people could see that from a mile away. If you are a friend or family member and you're asking your loved ones, your friends, it seems like more is going on, what happened and how can I help? They're typically receptive to them. You're not overstepping to ask, is there more going on? In fact, you might be asking a very almost immediately validating question, because what people often sink into is shame. Shame is at some point, my trauma's affected me for a very long time, but at some point I turn on myself and I start telling myself, this is a problem I should just fix. It shouldn't be here. And when somebody asks the question, what happened? What's going on that this is such a problem? It oftentimes can help the person ask themselves that, why am I acting like this? What could this be something more going on? Of course, the answer is yes, there is more going on. So the fear of overstepping. We're
Oh,
not
yeah.
re-traumatizing people by asking questions. Not sure how much cut out, but I guess I'll summarize what I think is the most important part. Be genuine, curious, compassionate, and you're not overstepping. Ask the questions. What's really going on? You seem overwhelmed. How can I help? We need to acknowledge that their trauma is still affecting them, because they may have repressed it and are pushing it down, and now they're just shaming themselves.
That's one of the biggest things of why I've been successful in connecting with so many people. I was able to just create a space with individuals where there was no judgment, and it was just tell me what really happened, or
Mm-hmm.
this is a space where if you send me an email with your traumatic events listed out, like that's not going to go anywhere unless you want it to go somewhere. And I've noticed that the more people talk about the traumatic things that they've been through, uh, in the context of healing and finding peace, if you can bridge that gap between trauma and then your journey to finding peace, if you can talk through it and really, I guess, process the trauma and then figure out how to apply it in a positive way to your life. That's been, I don't know.
That's the challenge. And honestly, I think that what you're highlighting is something that people are hesitant, maybe even scared to address is, can something terrible, something traumatic be used in a positive way? In the present, I would say yes. Um, you can
What
turn it positive, but it's not, we're not saying where it gets abused and people are often beat up with it is, well, why don't you just show gratitude? Why don't you just turn it
Mhm.
into something positive? Well, okay, but I need help with that.
I
Do that on my own.
it's almost like you need or I need space to just sit in it and experience it and be safe while I think about it to
Right.
reprocess it.
Yes, it has to be reprocessed because initially it was traumatic and just bringing it up again is not helpful. I tell people bad trauma therapy. And I've, the number of patients that I've worked with that said this was their first experience with trauma is really sad. Just talking about trauma over and over and over again is not in and of itself therapeutic. You're supposed to be reprocessing it in different ways. It's not going back and saying, yes, this is the day I got sexually abused and it was my fault. Um, Telling that story over and over again never gets better. We're supposed to be
Right.
challenging, it was not your fault. We're supposed to be challenging, you are safe and empowered in the present, and you're not bad for what happened to you. I have a little thing I work with my patients on. Nothing done to you or by you in the past defines you in the present. If that doesn't feel true, we've got some trauma therapy work to do. Um, there's
I
got,
like how you say if that doesn't feel true.
mm-hmm,
I've noticed a lot of times I see you asking me, well, how does it feel when you think about this and this and this?
yep,
I like the way you do that because it almost puts me in the situation and makes me actually think about what would happen if something happened.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that question is very intentional because I tell people all the time the logical mind is not very healing, not very restorative. That which feels true is more powerful than that which is logically true. I tell people all the time the number of trauma survivors that I've worked with who feel like it's their fault, but can logically say, well, I know it's not my fault. Um, and it's like, okay, but does that feel true? No. Then we've got work to do. Memory reconsolidation, EMDR, newer trauma informed modalities. At the end of the work, it's like that feels 100% true. That was not my fault. I did not deserve that. I don't have to live in fear of that anymore. And that's such an incredible place for a person to get.
I think
That,
people forget about that end goal. They don't
they,
realize that that's what they're working toward.
I, and that's where I tell people, we need to start seeing PTSD as a treatable, curable condition, not to say that the trauma didn't affect me and to some extent won't affect me anymore, but the elimination of the fight or flight system being overactive and interfering with my day-to-day functioning, eliminating shame narratives like it's my fault, I'm worthless, not good enough. All those things can change through memory reconsolidation, EMDR. We can get those positive narratives back. We can share our stories and function in healthy, happy ways again.
Yeah. I see here a quote of yours. If you suspect someone is struggling, ask. So that was one of the main points you made.
Yeah.
People often want help but are afraid to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And be patient, compassionate, and supportive without excusing harmful behavior.
Right.
That last part, setting boundaries, right?
Mm-hmm. Something that is significantly harder for trauma survivors when it is unresolved, unfortunately.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for joining us for the very first episode of Trauma in the Brain podcast. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you.
Um, if today's conversation resonated with you, I invite you to connect with us on Quora Instagram, and our other socials, or support the project on Ko-Fi. We've officially raised $5. I'm
Nice.
pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
And don't forget to follow the podcast so you won't miss upcoming episodes where we'll continue unpacking trauma and exploring paths towards healing. Until next time, remember you're not alone on this journey.